Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Ideas X Lab's Uncovering Connection and Inclusion video podcast, powered by Switcher Studio and supported by Main and Clay. My name is Josh Miller. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Ideas X Lab, and I'm really excited to engage in a dynamic conversation today with Jesse Hawkins from the Mocktail project. And before I bring Jesse on, I just want to re-ground us for a second in why we are launching and continuing to have these discussions through the video podcast. And as we are moving through these ever-changing times, we want to think about the role of curiosity and courage in how we come together, how we connect, how we focus on inclusion, what inclusion looks like now, but what it will look like after the pandemic, and how we can use this time to connect networks, connect resources, and to come together around what these shared experiences are and how we carry those forward with us. So I was connected to Jesse Hawkins a year or two, well, it's now definitely been over a year, 2 to 3 years ago, and I stopped drinking alcohol. It'll be 2 years on what would have been Derby Day, the first Saturday of May this year. And the Mocktail project has really been a tremendous asset, not only in terms of how I think about creative ways to still enjoy delicious beverages that just aren't alcohol infused, but also as a network of how we support each other in thinking about spaces that are inclusive and welcoming for everyone, whether or not you drink. And so I thought this was a great time as we think about the different ways that people are coping, they're trying to stay connected, to bring Jesse on and to have a conversation around some of the things that give him oxygen and the work that the Mocktail project is doing. So Jesse, I am going to get you pulled up on the screen. Welcome to the Uncovering Video podcast.
Thank you for having me on, and congratulations, 2 years. It's a big deal, and I've been grateful to be connected with you. So
thanks. I have so enjoyed just learning about kind of the landscape that exists and continues to evolve in terms of alcohol-free cocktails and the way that people can support that. But before we dive into that facet, I'd love to for people to learn a little bit more about you. One of the questions that I often start with is, what gives you oxygen in your life and in work in general? And I'd love to kind of start there.
definitely. So you're 2 years coming up on Derby, and for myself, I will actually be celebrating 6 years next week. And I was 25 when I made that choice to have my last drink, and in 2017, I started the Mocktail project, really as a reflection of my own story as a non-drinker, especially living here in bourbon community. And it was something that, I was terrified to walk back into bars, or, the idea of going to the Derby. And, truly what brings me oxygen is, times like this, waking up to an email or an Instagram post, or, something where, I think what's so interesting about the project is we really don't know who in rooms may be making the personal choice not to drink, or maybe just pausing for the day, or, maybe it's a dry January situation where they're just trying to get their year kicked off in a healthier way. And so often, individuals, it's a daunting thing to say I'm not drinking, around friends or colleagues, or, whatever that personal choice is. And then to have them reach back out later and to say, I really appreciate you being there, and, just being mindful and being very intentional, and always ensuring that, there's non-alcoholic options ready available, and done in a way that is fun and creative, and it tastes good, and it's playful. And, I think what brings me the most joy, in this project is being able to reconnect with, what, is a complete stranger, and just having that shared bond of, just a common drink, what we take for granted, somebody ordering a beer, going out for happy hour. It's that individual that reaches back out, that says, hey, I am celebrating a year, and we met at this event, and you don't know what it meant to me at the time. And that's the reason that, I continue to go each and every day. And it's really just building a tribe, and, continue to be very intentional and being mindful, and doing it in a way that, again, just welcomes everybody and makes everybody feel comfortable.
Yeah, you talk about being that, how are you being welcoming? And it makes me think back to Derby this past year where you all, the Mocktail Project, had an actual booth. And when I came and found you all on Derby Day to get a mocktail. And I loved seeing there was a father and their teenager. And the father was saying, oh, you should try this one because it tastes like the mint julep that I'm holding. And they were able to have this shared experience in a different way where you wouldn't have been able to have that before. And so I think all of those different facets really play an important role, like you talked about.
Yeah, definitely. It's speaking of Derby, it was a personal goal of mine growing up here. My story really kind of started at the Derby back in 2014, and I remember standing there. My old Kentucky home comes on, and everybody's sitting there, they're embracing each other, and they have their mint juleps raised in the air, and it's a really special moment for us Kentuckians. And I remember standing there with a bottle of water, and thinking to myself, is the rest of my life going to be able to participate in events or really attend events, but not be able to participate in events? And it was a really special day there at the Derby last year. I'm glad that it's getting postponed. It's definitely odd being here in Kentucky in April and not planning for the Derby. But I think it'll be equally as special, in the fall. I think it'll just be that much more intentional.
Yeah, I'm so interested to see what a fall derby is like. I think the time of year is going to shift that. I remember going to Breeders' Cup I think it was in November a few years ago. And so I'm kind of re-envisioning like all of what that experience is going to be. And I think it'll be, especially after a few months of being with social distancing and being separated from everyone, a great way to come back together and celebrate a little bit.
Absolutely.
So one of the things, as we've had these different conversations on the video podcast and also thinking about how people relate to drinking or kind of these other social ways that they engage, we've also been thinking about this topic of covering. So downplaying or hiding facets of ourselves. And I think you referenced that earlier in terms of people who don't drink sometimes kind of cover or mask that because there are different stigmas related to that. So I was wondering for you as an individual, if you could talk about where you've seen covering kind of in your past and the proactive steps you've taken to think about how you shift that.
Yeah, it's so before the Mocktail Project, I used to work in business consulting, and it was every single day. It was at 5 o'clock. It was happy hours with friends or colleagues, or constantly taking out clients to go get a drink, and really trying to break down those barriers, or what perceived barriers. I think so often we think that, for networking or if we're going to go out for business or even just with colleagues, when we refer to let's just go have a drink, we've coined that term as really that means alcohol. And it was, it really took me a good amount of time to even tell my colleagues, like,
Jesse, I'm going to pause you for a sec. So I think we lost our connection for a second. So hopefully we are back on now with you all. And Jesse was just starting to talk about where he had experienced and was seeing instances of covering in his life. So Jesse, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Yeah, definitely. So I was sharing, before the Mocktail Project, I used to be in business consulting, and here's a personal story from my journey in this. It was about 2 or 3 weeks. We go up to Rochester, New York for training. And, here I was 25 at the time. It was business. We had 2 weeks. We had expenses that we could go out and we'd all have drinks after training. And I was so insecure at the time of just saying like, no, like I don't drink. And, I didn't realize, that you could just say that. I didn't know how to answer that or, really how to portray that of just saying like, no, like I don't drink. And so my brother's name is John. And I remember making up this entirely baloney story about how my brother was sick and He was fighting and, trying to get healthier, and he was trying to run a marathon. And this is like this whole like terrible story that I made up. I was like actually telling colleagues, and I said, I'm not going to drink up here in Rochester because I'm training for this marathon that I want to run with my brother John. And it was my way of just kind of pushing it off, rather than acknowledging just like, no, I'm making the personal choice that I don't want to drink, because my best version of myself is when I don't drink. Now for somebody else, the Mocktail Project is so much about inclusion. And if you want to have a drink or a great glass of wine, and, pair that with an alternative option so that everyone can feel welcomed, that's what I believe in. But, for me, my personal best version of myself is when I choose not to drink. And, I can't tell you how many times in my early sobriety I would make up these stories or just push it off, or, do all these things that, I really wasn't showing up as Jesse.
Yeah.
But I was masking because, society has really put this stigma around, ooh, like you don't drink. Or when you say you're not having a drink, it's like, oh, we'll just have one. Well, yeah, it's Thursday. You're not going to do a lot of work on Friday. There's always these comebacks.
Yeah.
And, I think a lot of it really stems from just the fact of making it socially acceptable. Something that I'm really striving to do here in our community. If, it's saying that, if we want to be the bourbon capital of the world and we want to, do it better than anyone, then let's also do alternative options better than anyone else as well. What a great goal to have, for our community, saying that, if we want to have great culinary and great cocktails and great bar programs here in our community, let's also be just as mindful for the 30% of Americans that don't drink, and welcome those individuals back into all of our events and social environments.
Yeah, it was, and I think a lot of people who, for whatever reason, are not drinking when they're out socially or wherever they may be, have had that inner dialogue of like, how am I going to respond to this? What is that story? And then what happens when people come back because they're not understanding? I know when we went to Paris in 2018 for the Gay Games, and it was so interesting to see on every menu at a restaurant, there were non-alcoholic specialty drinks. And that's just not something that you see everywhere when you go to restaurants here in Louisville or other cities. And so just over the past few years, it's been really wonderful to see more and more places, Butchertown Grocery and Proof at 21C and Harvest and all of these different restaurants starting to feature that as a signifier that's saying we value you being here and we want you to be part of this celebration of coming together. And so we're going to dedicate time to making something just for you. And I think that that's really important.
Yep, I agree.
So can you just talk a little bit about, getting back to the tradition of Derby, for example? How have you seen different corporations, different events really embrace striking the balance of, yes, we have such a tradition of bourbon and these spirits that are produced in Kentucky and in Louisville, and then also rounding it out with the alcohol-free cocktails? How have you seen some really step up and take that on in stride and do a good job with it?
Yeah, well, I mean, you just named a couple that, definitely in our community, I'm really proud of, the efforts that they're putting in, Butchertown Grocery and some of the other, restaurants. Brown-Forman has definitely been, a brand from day one that has supported the mission. They were the reason we were at Derby last year. It's Jackie Zayakan of Old Forester that stepped up, and we co-created, one of the recipes. And if you go down to George's bar down at the distillery during Derby time, they always have an alternative option. And it was 2017 when this mission started. And I don't believe that there was, one single distillery along the Kentucky Bourbon Trail that was actively promoting and had alternative options on their menu. And then we started a campaign in October called Mocktober. And last year we had more than 20 distilleries actively, promoting and sharing and posting pictures of alternative options. And, I think the conversation always goes back to, well, we've always done it this way and it's always kind of worked. And then when you actually start posting photos of alternative options and, you actively start that conversation, you realize how many people in that community don't drink, whether it's, the company that's helping you get to the distillery, or, maybe it's the food supplier that, is helping you cater at your events. There's so many different dynamics that goes into, bourbon in our community. And, I'm really proud of, the work that's been put in over the last few years to make it more inclusive. Now I think the next step really has to come from, why are we still actively having to ask you to put it on the menu rather than you, just being mindful and intentional, and it starts to become something that's ingrained and something that, when you show up, you automatically know there's going to be something there rather than still guessing if something's going to be there. And that's really where I want to take the Mocktail project, whether it's a charity event or forecastle, or, if you just want to have a luncheon with your friends at the office, that you can think of the Mocktail project as being that outlet to serve those alternative options and create that experience for you. Or if it's not us, then just understanding that, there are resources and outlets, and, just making sure that there will always be an alternative option on menus.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's slowly been slow progress, but progress none the least.
It is. And I think that, the stigma we have to get over is non-alcoholic drinks are not for those who just don't drink, but it's really an option for everybody. My mother, she may go out and have a glass of wine, and dad will have, 2 or 3 cocktails. And so that transitional period in between drinks is so important. It's about creating great experiences and being hospitable and, really leaving that consumer with the best possible experience they can have. And if you start out with a great glass of wine and then transition over to soda or water, that's the last thing they think about, when they leave that place. And so, I think for me during this downtime, it's really, how do we start to, make alternative options something that's equally mindful and intentional, and ready available, from, like I said, whether it's, Pride Festival or Forecastle, making sure that there's always something there. And then not only there, but it's promoted that it's there, and how do we find it and how do we access it? Derby 2019 was a great first step, but there's definitely some building blocks on that, on how do we, be able to, find our booth there, right?
Yeah, for Derby Diversity in Business, and you outlined for us a recipe. So I walked in up to the bar, because it was a different bar than where you were, and I was like, this is the mocktail that I want, and here's the recipe. And we want to get to a place where people don't have to come with the recipe and to ask for all of the things to be put in the cup, but where that's being promoted. Yeah. So you mentioned using this time that we're in right now, thinking about we're all social distancing. There's so many people online, trying to engage with each other. And you did a live stream yesterday. So can you talk a little bit about how you are approaching this time in terms of thinking about not only the Mocktail project, but also the other resources or support networks that people may be in need of, that they would have sought out in person, but may need to try to access in a different way?
Yeah, the one that definitely comes to mind immediately is, especially for those in the food and beverage, or hospitality space, is there's a great organization called Ben's Friends, that is really, it's not AA, it's not NA. They just call it a bridgeway to recovery or a bridgeway to sobriety. And it's just a great support group. And they had been meeting once a week. And now that, this has happened, rather than hosting meetings, they're going virtual online. And I know that it's something that you can zoom into, and it's really still just a safe space that, you can see like-minded friends and, listen to like-minded conversations. I think about so often right now, when we look at liquor stores as being an essential, store that's open, I'm completely on board with, but the opposite side of that coin is if we're saying, it's okay to have a drink to cope with and deal with, and, having a drink at our meal, what are the individuals who don't consume alcohol? What are we doing during this time? What's our outlet, and, what are we doing to stay safe and, not fall back into that if that's our personal choice. Again, I think that, the perfect balance is always, for the individual that wants to have a drink, that's great. And the person that doesn't, let's have something equally as good. So I tried my first live stream on Monday. It was funny. It was embarrassing. It was sad. It was a good first effort. I'm going to continue to try and get better at it. Something that, I enjoy about the live stream, but wish I could, create something as a sense of community where we can actually check in and see what the other person on the screen's doing.
Yeah.
I may transition it over to Zoom where it's more like a happy hour and you can meet people in our community that maybe doesn't drink. And, maybe we do like a cocktail class and, we're sitting there and you can communicate with other individuals rather than me just talking and, making it more of like a service announcement on this is how you make a drink. This is actually how we communicate and talk through this. So those are all things that I'm working on during this time on, how do we still have a community and a sense of socializing and seeing friends and making it comfortable during this time. And so, those are the things that I'm thinking about right now is, what are us non-drinkers doing and what are our outlets, to feel comfortable during these times of isolation and not communicating.
So outside of, and I think those resources, and I've seen a lot of virtual happy hours, if you will,
Yep.
Pop up. So I think that leveraging something like Zoom is a great idea in terms of people being able to congregate in a different way around that specific topic. But as you think kind of beyond just the Mocktail realm to Jesse specifically during this time, are there specific creative practices or outlets that you're searching out to kind of find that mental, physical, emotional, social health and harmony as we move through these times?
Yeah. For myself, I have been actively practicing a little bit more meditation than I, haven't, in the past. And then I really started journaling a lot more, and not only journaling on a personal side, but, also setting some more intentional goals that, how do I achieve those and the why behind them. I think that this time is really, it's making me trying to think more intentional. When you're reading news and you see individuals, going through what's happening right now, really makes you ask, what do I want out of my life? And when this is all over, what does communicating look like and what does events look like? So I've really been trying to read, different books or, different things that, manifesting the lifestyle that I want to live.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, that truly is right now, creating events and creating spaces and doing things that are very, very intentional, that brings joy to people. And from there, that's definitely staying content and, whether it's yoga or I'm trying to do daily, exercises as much as I can inside, have been bike riding a lot lately, but it's still very isolated and that's a struggle for an extrovert.
Yeah, I finally got back into my Luvelo account because I don't have a bike anymore.
Yep.
So I just was able this past weekend to go for a bike ride, which was a great way to switch it up. But I agree, it's definitely not only in talking with you, but in talking with a lot of people, how are we making the time to sit down and reflect and think about some of those deeper things? Because as we come, A, this could last longer than any of us know, but B, as we come out of it, we're going to be met with a lot of unknown, but a lot of busy. You
Sure.
think about how much has been moved to the fall, and so it's great to hear how different people are practicing ways of kind of setting the foundation that they'll be able to that to best serve them as they move forward.
Yeah, and I think this is me selfishly talking when I say this, and I'm actively still supporting bars and restaurants, but I think that we'll do this really wrong if we get to the end of this and the first thought is let's go out and see how much we can get drunk at a bar and not connect.
Yeah.
I think in a perfect world for me it would be like when all of this is over, how are we connecting and having actual human conversations and interacting with each other, and what did those events look like, and who are hosting those spaces where we can truly be present and talk and have fun. And if you want to have a drink, that's great, but I think we do this really wrong if we get out of this and the first thing is individuals getting to bars and blacking out and forgetting. And I hope that at the end of all this we realize how precious life is, and really creating spaces where we can connect and get to know each other just on a more human basis.
Yeah, I was texting with someone this morning, and a team member, and it's been a few weeks since we saw each other in person, and we didn't know the last time we were all in person at a meeting that like, because everybody decided very quickly, like we're all remote working as best as we can. We're going to social distance. And we were just texting and saying, like, if we had known that was the day, like we would have had a big hug, like
right.
that we would have like treasured that moment, because now that's what we're craving. Like, I just want a hug, or
Yep.
And it kind of helps you reprioritize and think about those smaller moments when we're connecting on a far more intimate level of like, that's what I'm going to go seek out afterward.
Yeah, I hope all the creatives are being super creative right now, and I can't wait to see what unfolds and manifests from the arts communities and the music community, and all of those type of communities that truly brings not only joy, but I think like when you look at the creatives of the world, those are the memories that last in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Is music and art and culture and food, and it's not the really long nights that I want to forget. I hope at the end of all this, those are the places that I want to personally seek out of my life, and that's what I'm trying to manifest right now. During this downtime is how do I create those experiences for individuals when we get out of this?
Yeah, and you mentioned art, like arts and culture, and everywhere that I'm looking, that is what people are searching out as their outlet, right? Where people are binging hours and hours of shows on Netflix or reading all of these books. And so are there specific movies, books, artistic areas that you've kind of sought out during this time as a way to just kind of have an outlet and to kind of take up some time, but also to be creative for yourself?
Yeah, I've gotten back into my 78 records.
Nice.
Getting back into just some of those like good old like the Otis Reddings and I music that is actually being played. I love my DJs and I love dancing, but truly like music that is being cultivated by an individual. I have been cooking a lot, something that I neglected, and my story was living in a van for 2+ years and being on the road, and every meal was out. So this has been a good pause for me to be able to get back into my kitchen and actually make it with my hands, and there's a lot of joy in that.
What are some of the favorite things that you've made?
The other day I made So a lot of soup right now. I'm finally transitioning out of soups, like it's finally sunny now. Um, I did a blue cheese and big jam grilled cheese the other night with my tomato soup. It was so good. Um, it's oddly it's sad. It's really whatever's just kind of left over in my fridge, and I tend to make it. A lot of pastas. I love Italian food. I'm making some sweet potato hash for lunch today at some point. So it's some healthy, some not, but the grilled cheese was not healthy, but it was so good.
Yeah, I think you have to find that balance of you have to be able to find pleasure in
Yep,
some of the food, especially right now. And I know that there's definitely been a day each week where it's like, okay, what food still exists? Can it be
yep,
made into an edible dish?
yeah.
Because the kind of the expectation of like running out to grab something every day is not there. And so it
And that's a good
requires
thing.
you to be more creative and to kind of say, how do we make a totally new thing of things that we would never imagine putting together?
Yep, absolutely.
Well, as you kind of going off our discussion today, as we wrap up our time together, is there anything else you'd like to share, recommendations, recipes, anything for viewers?
Um, no, I think that, for myself, as I continue to, whether it's live streaming or not, I think that, if you are a non-drinker or if you do drink and maybe you're just taking this time to pause or, whatever that may be, um, it's for me, the Mocktail project moving forward and always has been, but it's really about, how do we make this a community and a tribe and, um, you know, reverting back to your original question, what brings me life is and what gives me, that oxygen is, seeing your recipes. And, I love getting tagged in posts and then, having that conversation and recreating it, from myself. And, if you have ideas on, what makes an ideal social space for you, those are the conversations that I would love to have, during this time. And, I have nothing but time right now to chat. um, and I love sponging and having conversations. And, whether if you're planning an event in the fall and something like a mocktail bar or, recipes, it's a time that I would love to have that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So when we leave here and whenever this is over, because it'll eventually pass, how do we get back to not just socializing, but socializing better and socializing more intentional and more inclusive. And, it would be amazing to think when we leave this time and we start this next chapter, why can't we start it out with every event has a cocktail and a mocktail? What a great transitional piece that would be. That would be, a goal for me to go tackle.
Yeah, I know as I have planned events, that's been one of the things in working with you and seeing the different recipes and things that I've really focused on having those options. Sometimes I'm the only one that drinks the mocktail, but that's okay because at least it was there and then I can convince people to try it. Yep. So it's really about how are we expanding the way that we're all thinking about and engaging with each other. And I think you said it really well. So if people are interested in connecting, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so the mocktailproject.com. There is a communication form or just a form that goes directly to me. And then on social media at the Mocktail Project, so Instagram and then Facebook. So those are the easiest ways for me to communicate.
Awesome. Well, Jesse, thanks for making time today. It's so good to be able to connect and catch up during this time. And I am excited to continue engaging with the Mocktail Project moving forward.
Likewise. And thank you. And thank you for hosting me and for doing this. It's been a pleasure going back and listening to all the other creatives and everyone else in our community. So thank you.
Thanks, Jesse. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for tuning in for today's Uncovering Connection and Inclusion video podcast. I really enjoyed being able to connect with Jesse and to talk about the different ways we can think expansively about how we're creating social engagements and the role of non-alcoholic cocktails in restaurants in life, and how we and just how we think about and approach that in an open-minded way. So if you want to learn more about this series, revisit the conversations that Jesse mentioned, you can go to ideasxlab.com/uncovering and join us again on Thursday at noon for our next video podcast. Have a great day, and we will see you soon.